Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Tonight I've got Quinn Stone on with me. How's everybody doing tonight? It's Wednesday night. Thank you for joining me, Quinn.
I appreciate it. Thanks again for having me on. This is such an honor. So I'm very grateful to be here.
Yeah, awesome. If you guys are watching live, drop your clean date in the comments. If you're in recovery, drop your sobriety date, your clean date. Tell us where you're watching from. So Quinn just did his story on my YouTube channel, Hope Shot Recovery. And I'm going to drop that in the comments so that you guys can watch it. He told his story. It was so powerful. You guys have got to check it out. And, I just want to tell you, you said something during your story that just really connected to me. You talked about how when we found substances, we were looking for love, like it filled that love feeling, right? Is that how you said it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Well,
that's just
so
connected to me so much.
so actually something that helped me tremendously early on in recovery was I started doing a lot of research on how addiction, I love you. Sorry, I saw 1111 and I have this thing where if I see 1111, I tell my spirit guides I love them. But
Oh,
anyway,
okay.
I saw this thing. So like I said, I was doing research on like how habits are formed, like in the brain, what is the chemistry that's actually happening. For me personally, I understand why I was stuck in substance abuse for so long. It was because I was running from, the traumatic events and my past and all these other things. But I didn't understand what is actually happening with the biology in the brain. Like, why do I crave? And I found out that it's all about the habit cue, what they call the habit cue, where your brain receives a cue and it builds a routine to receive the reward. And that's how it is with everything, whether it's love or friendships or addiction of any sort. Your brain gets the cue or a trigger, if you want to call it that. And then you get into the routine and then you get the reward. And so your brain is looking, when it gets the cue, it's looking how to get the reward. And the reward
Mhm.
is always dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, whatever that feel good chemical is. And so your brain is constantly seeking that reward. And the way to change the way that a habit works, you need to change one of those components, either the cue, the habit, or I'm sorry, the cue, the reward, or the routine, to get out of, to break that cycle, the habit loop cycle. And so for me, you know, understanding that, like how habit is working in the mind, like the biology of it, really, really helped me. There was a philosopher called um, Maslow. What was his Abraham Maslow was his name, and he coined this analogy or this metaphor. I'm not exactly sure. It's basically the five essentials of what you need in your life to feel fulfilled, and it
Mhm.
consists of the top one being, and I'm probably going to either not get them all or whatever, but basically, he said there are five basic needs in every person's life that you need to feel fulfilled. Obviously, the number one thing is like your basic biological needs, like water, food,
Mhm.
and then you need a sense of community, family, friends, relationships, things like that. Then you need hobbies, then you need
Mhm.
self-esteem, and then the last one is security. And so when I was missing one of those things, like if I had no self-esteem, I would
Mhm.
relapse. And so it's this triangle of the five basic needs, right? And like I said, it's stacked on top of each other. Your biological needs being the lowest one, which is your biggest one, and then your self-esteem being the highest one. And for me, I found that when I was missing any one of those five categories, it was like it was like my soul was missing something in life, right? Whether if it was self-esteem, I had no self-esteem. I was missing that gap that one thing
Mhm.
that I needed to complete the 5 things to feel fulfilled. If I didn't have a sense of community, I didn't have, relationships, I didn't have a family because I basically burned all my bridges and all these things, I would feel that emptiness. If I, didn't have a sense of security, I didn't have a job, I didn't have a home, that gap would be missing. And so what I noticed for myself is that when something was missing out of these categories, whether it was one or two or all of them, I would go back to relapse because I had
Mhm.
that emptiness and I was searching for something to fill that empty gap. And the thing about substances is that when we take a substance, it's releasing dopamine, and that's what we're craving. And so when we take a substance, just for measure, when you wake up in the morning and it's a good day, your brain is releasing about 50 micrograms of dopamine just when you wake up on a regular day. You make it to
Mm.
work on time, traffic was great, you hit all the green lights, you get into your job, and your boss tells you, "Hey, I saw what you did on that project yesterday. You did an amazing job. Keep it up. You're going to get that raise." You're getting like 75 micrograms of dopamine. When you fall in love with somebody and you get that feeling that you're like, "Oh my God, I've found the one. Like, this is the one for me. I'm so in love with this person." You're releasing about 100 micrograms. When you take a hit of methamphetamine, you're releasing over 1,000 micrograms. So
Wow.
when you take a hit of methamphetamine, you're literally releasing 10 times the amount of dopamine that you would if you were to fall in love. And so it's like when we are craving this sense of community or a relationship or somebody to just like not feel alone and feel accepted, and we get that by dopamine, by the dopamine flood, like I fall in love, somebody understands me, I get that
Mhm.
dopamine release, somebody, like can relate to me and they say, "Hey man, I know what you mean." I get that dopamine release. And so when I'm taking a substance like methamphetamine or, heroin is 800 micrograms, cocaine is
Wow.
nearly 1,000 micrograms, methamphetamine is like 11 to 1,200 micrograms. So when I'm taking these substances, I'm like overloading my brain with
Mhm.
dopamine. And so because my brain doesn't understand the difference between the dopamine that I get when I fall in love and the dopamine that I get when I'm using a substance. All the
Mhm.
brain knows is, hey, whatever this is, whatever this feeling is, like if you're kissing, I like this feeling and it's releasing that dopamine. And so your brain doesn't can't distinguish the difference between the dopamine that's getting released when you kiss the person you're in love with. It can't distinguish that between that dopamine and the dopamine that's released when you take a hit of methamphetamine. Like I said, all it knows is whatever it is that you're doing right now, continue to repeat this action because this works for me. Like this feels good.
Mm.
This feels right. I feel loved. I feel at home. I feel complete, right? And so what I found was that the more I used substances to fill those empty gaps of, if I was missing the self esteem or I was
Mhm.
homeless or all these other things, I would trick my brain into thinking that I was complete by using a substance that overloaded me with the dopamine feeling that I was chasing. So that's really what made a lot of sense to me. It was like, oh,
Mhm.
it's not that I'm now that I've removed the substance back when I had like a few months sober, now that I've removed the substance from my life, I'm still craving this dopamine flood that my brain is used to on a daily basis. And so I had to start saying, okay, well now it's not that I'm not craving the drugs because I understand where the drugs are going to lead me. The drugs are going to lead me homeless with no
Mhm.
relationships, with, running from the law and all these other things. It's not actually that I'm craving the substance. It's that I'm craving that constant dopamine flood that my brain has gotten used to. So what can I
Wow.
do to replace that dopamine flood? And that's
Mhm.
when I started saying, okay, well, I'm gonna look into, sound healing, I do the singing bowls and things like that. I started working out. I started spending a lot of time out in nature, building rope swings and cliff jumps and all these other things to get my dopamine. I was learning a lot of things on YouTube, so and congratulating myself for learning stuff, because every time I was like, heck yeah, man, that's awesome. You're learning something. You did good. Boom, I'd get that dopamine flood. And so I started to replace, getting high 8, 9, 10 times a day and getting 8, 9,
Mhm.
10 dopamine floods a day, with getting 8 to 9, 10 dopamine floods a day through exercise, through eating well, through learning things, through working on, myself, doing shadow work, yoga, all these other things. And pretty soon my brain was like, oh, it's not actually the drugs that I crave, it's the dopamine that I've been craving. And so when I get triggers, that's how I look at it. It's like, oh, my brain doesn't know that I don't want drugs. It just wants a dopamine flood right now. And all that I've taught my brain in the past is that I get dopamine floods from substances. And so my brain's not actually saying, hey, I want a substance right now. It's saying, hey, I am craving something right now. I'm craving some kind of stimulation. And so that's when I started like like feeding that. Like, okay, brain, you want some stimulation? Let's go to Barnes and Nobles and pick up a book. Like,
Mhm.
stimulation, like let's go build a rope swing and jump into the river or something. Um, I get a lot of people who are like, I've been sober for a year now, and sobriety sucks. And
Right.
and it's like, well, yeah, of course it sucks, because you went from getting 10 dopamine floods a day to like literally doing a job that you hate, living around people that are toxic and talking to the same toxic people, and so you're not getting any dopamine floods. So your brain is like, dude, we went from 10 dopamine floods a day to nothing. Why are we even sober? Like, this isn't what
Mm.
we're craving. We're craving dopamine floods. We know where to get it. Go get your dopamine floods. We have that constant voice that's like, dopamine, dopamine, dopamine. You want it, you want it, you want it. And so, that, like, it was a game changer for me to realize it's not a substance that I'm craving. It's the stimulation, or the sense of
Right.
community, or the sense of security or self-esteem, or it wasn't actually the substance. It's just what I had taught my brain to think was the solution to the stimulation.
Wow,
Sorry, that
that's crazy. No, that's good. I
was
love that. I love that. No, listen, when you were talking about that, my brain was like, boom. That's why the first time that I ever did a substance, it was like I remember everything about it. I remember where I was at, how it smelled, how it sounded, the people that I was with, and I
right.
instantly fell in love. Now it makes sense. But this is what I'm thinking, right? So after initially, like when you do it, in the beginning it's great, but then it doesn't work and it doesn't work, and you don't get that dopamine rush like you did in the beginning. We're always chasing that first one,
Right.
right? So
Right.
I'm wondering over time, I mean, and maybe I do you know the answer to this? Like, do you get less dopamine because maybe your body doesn't produce as much dopamine?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely right. The more long-term substance abuse we go through, the more it takes. The tolerance. It's basically, the way that I can kind of relate it is, back when I was younger, I would experimented a lot with ecstasy, and the first time I did ecstasy, it was just like insane. And then I did it like for like a week straight, and then by the end of that week, it was like it wasn't even working anymore, because
Mhm.
the serotonin had just been depleted. And it took me like a couple of weeks to another month before I like came out of this deep depression, because my brain had stopped producing that chemical. The more that we get dependent on a substance, the more our brain says, hey, we're getting this dopamine flood from somewhere else, like somewhere outside of us. So no point in working out, no point
Right.
in learning something, no point in like building a good relationship. Like, we don't need those things to get a dopamine fix. Like, we get it
Mhm.
just by going and seeing our dealer. So like,
Mm.
why am I going to spend, you know, days and weeks and months trying to build like a relationship, a meaningful relationship with somebody, and get this little 100 micrograms of dopamine because I'm in love, when I could just like in the next 15-20 minutes go and pick up dopamine,
Right.
my dopamine fix, and then boom, I come back and I'm done, and I don't have to spend the time. I don't have to, and then I get 10 times the amount of dopamine. Like, our brain starts to say it's not even worth it.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay,
uh,
so listen, everybody, if you guys want, we're going to like answer questions. So if you have questions or topics that you want to talk about that's recovery related, drop them in the comments and we'll get to them. So you were just talking about the 5 domains. Somebody asked Abraham what so that they can look it up.
yeah, I just saw that. It's Abraham Maslow, Maslow, and the triangle itself that I'm talking about is called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That's kind of an interesting word, hierarchy. I always have problems spelling it, but I think it's Hierachch. Let's see, I'm not an
Yeah,
R.
don't ask
I
me.
missed one. Missed the R before the CHY, but
Yeah.
hierarchy.
Okay, so we have a comment that says that self-esteem has always been an issue for me. I know I used to make me feel better. And same, I felt the same way. So Quinn, from your experience, right? Because when we first get in recovery, like we don't have any self-esteem. That's one of the needs I believe that's probably been depleted more than anything. Like I felt like a total POS when I first got into recovery. So what
Mhm.
did you do to start building up your self-esteem?
So the easiest thing it kind of actually came accidentally. So like I was saying before about the way to break a habit is by changing the habit loop. So
Mhm.
you have the cue, the routine, and the reward. Well, my cue was, hey, I need the stimulation. My brain's like, hey, I need the stimulation. The routine was I go and pick up drugs and use drugs, and the reward was the dopamine flood. And so early on into my sobriety, I to break that habit, I fixed one of those three things. The only thing that I could fix was the routine, because I was so deep into addiction that like if going cold turkey was out of the question for me, because it's just too hard. My brain was just like,
Right.
man, it's just right there. So what I did is I changed one of those things, which was the routine. So I didn't
Mhm.
change the substance because I did medical assisted treatment, but I changed the routine. So I changed one of the things in that habit loop to get out of this habit, or at least make it easier for me to break down. So the only thing that I've changed was I was still using medical assisted treatment, Suboxone. I was still getting the reward, which was the dopamine, but instead, my routine was now, instead of going and picking up dope from the dealer, it was, staying at home at my sister's house and healing. Just
Mhm.
even just not doing anything is breaking that habit routine of giving in to that cue that says, "Hey, I want that stimulation release, or that dopamine release." And so I changed the routine first. Once I changed the routine, I then got off of Suboxone, so I then changed, the which is also part of the routine technically, but it's part of those things
Mhm.
to break down into smaller things. Um, and I started getting really deep into video games. Like I got so good at Call of Duty that I was ranked 4,000th and something in the world. So like out of like 300
Wow.
million players or something, I was ranked like 4,000th in the world. And I was just like on that every day
Mhm.
for like 8 hours a day. And that's what got my mind off of using. It was like I was sitting there. I remember I'm sitting here like coming off of Suboxone, like with my legs just like, restless leg
Oh
syndrome for
god.
like hours, just like rocking back and forth playing video games. Um, but it helped me. It helped me
Mhm.
because I was getting good at something. And then I won my first Call of Duty match after like a month. It took a while for me to get good, but after like a month, I won that first match and I got that dopamine flood. And I was jumping. I was jumping in my room like it, my dopamine had been building up
Mm-hmm.
for the month, that I wasn't using substances and starting to get acclimated to producing its own dopamine instead of getting it from outside sources. And so I was just like through the roof, and the more and more I got better at video games, the more I started building my self-esteem that like, hey, I'm accomplishing something. And I got so good that I bought all the Wi-Fi equipment and all the streaming equipment and everything. I started like streaming on Twitch and doing all this stuff.
Wow.
And then one day it just clicked for me because I was still smoking cigarettes at the time, and every time that I would play and I would lose, I would go out and have a cigarette. And I was like, man, I want to quit cigarettes because it's bad for my body, and I'm trying to like do something better to improve myself every like as often as I possibly can. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
well, what's making me crave this, the reward? What's making me crave the reward? And it was the stress that I was experiencing from losing the game. So I was like,
Mm-hmm.
well, man, this video game is only bringing down my vibration because I'm sitting here swearing at people on the internet. Like COD is like relentless. They say every like incorrect PC thing that you can think of on there, like to each other. So it's like, man, this is lowering my vibration. This is not where I want my life to go. Do I want
Right.
to be remembered for being like the best COD player? Like, no, that makes, that to me has no appeal. I see how it could have appeal to some people, but to me, it's just not appeal.
Right.
So I was like, okay, I'm gonna stop playing video games and I'm gonna start doing something else. And I started doing yoga, and then I started Bojitsu, which is basically like the Ninja Turtles. Donatello, he's
Yes.
the big staff. That's called a bow staff. It's called Bojitsu is
Nice.
what the like martial arts form of it is. And I started getting really good at that. And then I got the dopamine flood. Man, you're accomplishing something. You're doing good. And on top of that, I was getting into shape because it was making me like work out during this martial arts. And so I'm like, oh, like you're getting your six pack back. Like I started looking better. I started feeling better. And that dopamine was like, hey, like you're doing something. Like, dude, do you realize that you like 6 months ago you were contemplating a triple homicide, and today like you're sober, like getting your life together? Like this is huge, and like giving myself the pat on the back. Like
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of us, or at least for me, and I don't hope this doesn't sound super terrible, but for me, we get so many people who tell us, dude, I'm so proud of you. And I love that. I really do. But like the reality is that when we hear that, man, they don't know. They don't really know what we went
Right.
through. And although it's super heartwarming, I really appreciate it. It's like, man, if only you knew really what I like, and I don't, I'm not like here to be like, oh, let me tell you everything. Like, here's my
Right.
sob story. But like for me, it's like, oh man, if you only knew the things that I've been through, I'm just so proud of myself. And
Love
in
that.
in my head, that's really the most important. Really the most important opinion is the one that I have
Mm-hmm.
of myself. Like it's great if John, Mary, and Jacob all think that I'm sober and they're proud of me. It's even more fulfilling to me that me inside myself am proud of myself because I
That's
know what
right.
I've been through, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so like reassuring myself every now and then, like, dude, you realize you just hit 6 months, right? Like you realize you just hit a year, right? Like you realize, and it was just like giving myself that pat on the shoulder was releasing that dopamine flood that was convincing my brain, like, oh, this is why we're sober. Because we get
Yes.
just as much dopamine as if we would if we were using, but now we have relationships, we have sense of
Mm-hmm.
community, we have self-esteem, we have a home, we have possessions, we have, all these amazing things. And now my brain is like, holy cow, like it's not substances that I was craving. It was stimulation and love and
Mhm.
the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is what I've been craving, and now my brain is like, oh, now I see the two options in front of me. I can get
Right.
the super good dopamine release from being in substance abuse, or I can get the super dopamine release from like being healthy and living healthy and doing all these amazing things. And now I have the choice, and this choice seems so much more appealing now.
Yes, it really does. And you know what? I mean, you're right. Like today, like you could still get that big dopamine hit from but on this side, this dopamine that we get from living healthy and happy and connecting and doing the right thing, this one doesn't go away. This
Right.
one we come crashing down from.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and it's just your brain, like I said, your brain just starts to like make the correlation, like, oh, this is why we're sober.
Right.
Like for me, early on into sobriety, like I was saying, I went from getting 10 dopamine releases a day to nothing, and my brain's like,
Mhm.
why are we doing this? Like this sucks. Life sucks. Like this all, like, what are we doing this for? There's no, you know, there's nobody like really reinforcing you. There's nobody really telling you like how, going in depth about you know, how much progress you're making and doing all this stuff. And like there's small dopamine releases and our brain is just so flooded and so depressed that we don't
Mhm.
even really see these huge accomplishments that we're making on a daily basis.
Right.
But if we just took a second every day in sobriety, whether it's day 1 or day 2 or day 3, to just be like, dude, I'm so proud of you. Like statistically, it doesn't look good for us.
Right.
So every single day that you're accomplishing sobriety, I mean, that's a day to be thankful for. And
Yeah.
sure, we don't get the 10,000, the 1,000 micrograms of dopamine, but I mean, it's better than nothing if you're dead.
Yeah, that's so true. And so everything that you're saying, it makes so much sense to me. So the comment that's up here right now is from my friend Jennifer, and her and I have had very like a lot of talks about reprogramming your brain. And it's so funny because after we did the YouTube the other night, I watched something on the reward, the habit, and the what was the other one?
The cue.
The cue, the reward, and the habit. I watched something on that. So it's really crazy that we're talking about it tonight. And I love what Jen said. She said, making a list of the things that I had accomplished. And that goes with what you're saying is being proud of yourself, like being proud of
Right.
yourself. Because if you're not proud of yourself, then it doesn't really matter our opinion is the one that matters. And then she said, making a list of her strengths every day when she did her gratitude list to help her build up her self esteem. I
Mhm.
love that. So, what about gratitude lists? Do you do gratitude list every day?
So I have a routine that I walk outside every single day. I walk outside, after my, I brush my teeth and get a coffee or whatever. Just the moment that I walk outside, I'm just reminded to give gratitude. And so every day that I walk outside, I just pray to my higher power, and I tell my higher power that, I say, I love you. I say, I love you to the moon. I love you to the sun. I love you to the rain, to the air, to the earth. And then I hug myself, and I hug myself as tight as I can to be as ridiculous as I can. And for some reason, when I hug myself super tight, I just feel so ridiculous, and I just can't help but laugh. But I tell you, and I love you too, Quinn. And then I tell myself that I love myself back. And that's like my gratitude. But I also do, every Monday and Wednesday, and in after before shavasana at the end of yoga, our instructor tells us to think of one thing that we're grateful for in our lives. So gratitude is definitely a routine in my life.
Mhm.
Just for me, it's really super simple and basic. It's God, and it's the universe, and it's Mother Nature, and it's myself. And then when I do the yoga gratitudes, I give a lot of gratitude to my sister, who's helped me tremendously throughout my sobriety, and her husband and stuff. So yes, absolutely, giving thanks to something outside of us is beneficial for me, for sure.
Yeah, I love your sister. I don't even know your sister, but I've seen you guys in videos, and I know that she was a big part of your journey. And I just think it's so cool when we get to restore those relationships with our family, and I love what you shared about her, but you guys are going to have to watch the YouTube video to see that. But okay,
She's
so do
awesome.
you mind me putting you on the spot and asking you? I've heard you talk about your journey when you first stopped, right? How you used Suboxone for like a few days and then you gradually got off of it. We have a lot of people that
Yeah.
do, Matt, that watch videos and stuff. Can you talk about that? Do you mind? You don't have to if you don't want to.
No, I don't mind. I'd just like to mention that I am not a professional of any sort. I'm not, please, nobody do any kind of, don't take my advice or the way that I did it as a way of doing it. I don't recommend it at all. It's definitely not safe. I suggest, if you're thinking of doing any kind of Suboxone taper, or any kind of taper off of any opiate or benzodiazepine or alcohol, please see a professional, because there is risk of death. So, so when I decided to get sober, I tried to go to the methadone clinic, but because my veins were so, I when it got to the end, I was shooting up in the veins near my fingernails. Those were the only veins that I had in my body left. I mean, I had shot up for 18 years basically, and so, I mean, the ones in my arms, the ones in my fingers, in the tops of my hands, my feet, my legs, my thighs, my V lines, my neck, all of them were just gone, to the point where, like, I'd go to the hospitals and they couldn't do blood, they couldn't pull blood. I couldn't give blood, donate blood to try and get money. They couldn't pull it. They couldn't find a vein. So anyway, so I couldn't get Suboxone. I couldn't go to a methadone clinic, because the methadone clinics require that you have blood work to be able to be admitted. So I wasn't able to go to the methadone clinic, which meant I wasn't able to get Suboxone. I also didn't have insurance. I didn't have $400 to go to a doctor. I got Suboxone off the street. I got 10 subs. I got 10 strips, and I waited the 24 hours from the last time that I used opiates to induce the Suboxone, or to ingest the Suboxone. But after that long of substance abuse, your brain, like, there's just those opiate receptors are stuck onto your, I'm sorry, those opiates are stuck onto your opiate receptors so strongly that they're, like, basically embedded. And what Suboxone does is it kicks off the opiate receptors the opiates from your receptors, and that's what the naloxone does, and that's why we go into precipitated withdrawal. So I went into precipitated withdrawals like immediately, and I had waited like 24 hours. So I was like, and I was sick, and I was like, but I just didn't wait long enough, because I was on fentanyl. But anyway, there's another reason why I say go to a professional, because I know a lot of people who are like, man, I went there and they put me on Suboxone. I didn't go through any withdrawals or anything. And I'm like, oh, well, I'm doing it wrong. Anyway, so the first day I took an 8. I went into precipitated withdrawal, which I had done many, many times. So I know exactly what to do. You literally just wait an hour and then take another one. And
I didn't know that. I've been in precipitated withdrawal before, but I did not know that. I just suffered the whole time.
Yeah, it sucks. Once, I guess once the buprenorphine has completely inhibited your opiate receptors, the more buprenorphine you take, the more the buprenorphine will fill those receptors. But it is only good until, I think, 24 milligrams. So 3 strips. Once you take more than 3 strips, they basically don't do anything. From what I've heard, your body can't, like, your body's metabolism can't break it down properly, or in some form it just can't take more than 24 milligrams of buprenorphine for some reason. That's what I've heard. I don't know if it's true.
Becca
Again,
says
not a
you're right.
professional.
Yep.
Okay. So yeah, so the first day I ingested too soon. 8 hours later, I took another one. About 30 minutes later, I fell asleep, thank goodness. And then the next day I was fine. And so for the next 60 days, basically I was tapering. So I went from 16 milligrams. The next day I took an 8. I went immediately down by half. So I took an 8. I took an 8 for like a day or two, and then I took a 4, and then I took like 4 for a few days, and then I started going down by like milligrams. So I'd go, down to like 3 milligrams, and then I started going down by like slivers, like, I don't know, I guess micrograms, or like quarter of milligrams. So I'd do like 3 3/4, 3.5, 3 2/4, or and then 3 1/4, whatever. I guess that's 3.5, 3 2/4. But anyway, I'd go down by quarters until basically I got down to, like, after 2 months, I was basically taking like a 16th of a milligram. Like the
Right.
little pieces were so small, that I was like cutting up with a razor blade. And I remember I still had a couple of them left. I still had, like, I think 1.5 full strips left. And I was like, you know what? I'm done with this, because okay, so I got to the point where I think I was taking like a half of, no, I was taking like a 16th or something, a 16th of a milligram every day. And I mean, 16th of a milligram is nothing. So after like
Yeah.
8 hours, I was like already getting like cold chills and things. And so like half the day I'd be withdrawing, and half the day I'd be good. And it got to the point where I was like, man, all I'm doing is just like making this harder on myself. I'm literally
Right.
putting something into my body, and then I'm withdrawing from it in the same day. So I'm like just doing this to myself. I'm just like using it, withdrawing every single day. So I'm like, I'm done. And I flushed the subs. I was like, whatever, it can't be worse than what I'm going through on a daily basis. I'm withdrawing daily, so might as well just like screw it. So yeah, so it took about 60 days, and the day after was basically what I expected, just a full day of like feeling crappy, how I did like when, at the end of the day. And for about a week I felt pretty crappy. Nothing like super restless legs and all this other stuff. But my anxiety was really up and down. My mood swings were up and down. I remember I was in a drive-through parking lot waiting or we were in the drive-through, and we were waiting for our food, and the line was so long that my anxiety was just, I was like, Mom, you have to leave. You have to leave.
Yeah.
I cannot sit here right now. But for about 2 more months, my anxiety was terrible. My sleeping was terrible. And I'd say it probably took about 6 months before I was motivated. And I'm not talking like, it took like 2 months, well, probably about a month before I even felt good enough to like do the dishes or make my own bed or like whatever. At about 6 months is when I was like, dude, I want to go out and do something. Like I want to like Suboxone was rough. It was rough
Yeah.
on me. But also, this is coming from somebody who was in substance abuse for 18 years. I have gotten sober with medical assisted treatment many, many times. And this last time, by far, was the worst. I can tell you at least
Really?
2 times. Oh, yeah. I can tell you at least twice where I did a Suboxone transfer, like from opiates to Suboxone, with no issues. And then I got off of Suboxone, no issues, because I did a 7-day Suboxone taper, and I had no withdrawals. But like, the more our brains are like, hey, this is how life is, and the more our bodies are like, hey, this is how we're used to living, and then the way that I treated my body, I'd go days without eating. And then when I did eat something, it was something super sweet because that's, the dopamine release that my brain is craving. So that's the only thing that tasted like anything was sugar. Um, I, neglected my body, my muscles, I was just so used to being in zombie mode that I didn't realize that when I got sober, I didn't even have enough strength to like really pull myself up one time on a bar.
Right.
So it took 6 months for my body to like start releasing dopamine again on its own, and serotonin and oxytocin, and start like, not being completely drained just for like walking out to the mailbox and getting the mail, because my muscles aren't used to, being so active. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize. It's like, oh well, I'm sober now. I removed the substance. Like life should be life should be rainbows and butterflies. It's like, no, you've got to really work towards it.
Right.
Like you've got to work towards getting that dopamine release, finding hobbies to replace, what we're used to, getting our body back to functioning how it was, and getting it back to like a normal state, which was very convoluted. The idea was very convoluted for me after so long of addiction. It's like, oh man, you're 30 days sober. You should be feeling
Right.
on top of the world. Why aren't you feeling better now? Like you felt better after 30 days before. It's like every time it gets harder and harder.
Right. Yeah,
You got me
I can
rambling
relate.
tonight,
Huh?
so you've got me rambling tonight.
I think it's going great. Okay, so we have 2 questions, but I actually agree with you. When I came off this time, I went through jail, so I went cold turkey. It was awful, and it still took me a solid 6 months before I was motivated. I mean, the withdrawals didn't take that long, but until I was like wanting to get out and do life was 6 months for sure, maybe even
Right.
a little bit longer. Okay, so I think you kind of maybe touched on this before, but so Steven says that he's having trouble thinking about it. And I'm guessing like having cravings and thinking of using. So do you have any suggestions for that? And then we're going to get to Becca. She asked a question too.
Sure. So like I kind of like how I was mentioning before, when I have triggers or I find myself thinking about using, really the thing that's helped me the most is understanding that like if I just take a second to think about it, like do I really want the substance? Do I really, like let's just say for example, I get in a fight with the person who's like letting me stay at their house or something, and they're like, we get into a fight, and because I don't know how to deal with my emotions properly, my brain says, hey, the only coping mechanism that we know to escape this like drama is to use. The biggest thing for me is understanding that it's not the substance that we're attracted to. It's the escape. It's the idea that like I can quickly change how I feel in this moment, and by getting this dopamine flood, right? It's like, oh well, I'm in an argument with my loved one. I want to feel loved. I want everything to be better. How do we do that? By tricking our brain, by over flooding it with dopamine. So now my brain is like, oh well, I don't care about being mad at freaking Stacy because freaking heroin loves me times 10,
Right.
And so it's, for me, it's really analyzing and being like, no, I know I don't want to use heroin because I know where that leads me. It leads me homeless, without relationships, no self-esteem, all these other things. And so it's not it's not the substance that I want. It's the dopamine, like the feel good feeling that everything's okay. When you get into an argument with somebody, you want to make things better. You want things to be resolved. And when you resolve something with somebody that you're in an argument with, you get the dopamine release because your brain's like, oh, okay, everything's better now. And when so if you don't make things better with that person, but you use, substances, then your brain is like, oh, everything's better now, because we've now tricked our brain into thinking everything's
Mhm.
better. Like, it doesn't know the difference between like actually working things out and getting the same dopamine or 10 times the dopamine flood of working things out, and analyzing that for me, being like, no, I know I don't want to end up or risking being homeless or, dead or losing a
Right.
relationship or whatever. It's that I want things to be better. I want to not feel how I feel right now. And so then I start to analyze, okay, well, how can I feel better without substances? How can I make this right, whether I'm in an argument, whether I lost my job, whether I, am experiencing some grief or guilt or shame or whatever. How can I not feel like this without a substance? And then whatever it is, I mean, usually your brain knows right away. Oh, what is it
Mm.
that you need to do? You need to go and apologize. You need to go and talk to this person and tell them why you lashed out, or why you felt this way, or why you felt offended, or what like, your brain is like, I know what to do. I just don't want to do it because it's easier for me to just use a substance.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes so much sense. In a way, it's like challenging that thought, right? And it reminds me, so I have this like terrible fear of elevators. And
Yeah.
here lately, I've been having to confront my fears, right? So I've been trying to figure out what is the cure for anxiety. Well, guess what? The only cure for it is to actually confront it by exposing yourself to it and challenging that thought, feeling the anxiety, and then talking yourself through it. And that just reminded me a lot of what you're saying. I mean, it makes so
Mhm.
much sense. Okay,
Yeah.
so Becca has a question. And I just want to say, like Quinn said a minute ago, we're not doctors, so it's kind of hard to answer this question, but maybe you could just share your experience if you have any. So she just had a major surgery where she got an abscess on her spine, and she also said she's missing bones in her spine. So she doesn't want to keep relying on the subs, but it helps her with pain. Do you have any advice for what she could do?
So the thing is that I have a very unconventional way, I guess I'd say, of thinking of things. In my personal opinion, I think that there was probably a remedy for most things that were outside of what the like FDA produces. And
Yeah.
so I would say, yeah, and again, I'm not a doctor, but I would say definitely look into like herbal alternative medicines. I, I it's kind of rough when, here you go. This is what I would say. I know that I know that some people need to be on substances, and I know that in some cases it's life saving to be on a substance. And you've got all these people out here who are like, well, you're not sober if you're on a substance. And then you ask those people, oh, but what if the doctor, what if it's going to save your life? What if I have cancer and I have to take chemotherapy to save my life? Am I sober then? Because chemotherapy is a mind and mood altering substance. So technically, by definition, taking chemotherapy is not abstinence. And so you have to ask yourself, like, what is sobriety to you? Like, is it me having to take my medications that are prescribed by a doctor to be alive? Like, to me, that's sober. It's not clean, by definition. It's not abstinence, but it's sober, because that's a sober thought. You have an ailment, so you go to the doctor, you get prescribed a medication that's supposed to heal your ailment. Like, what about that process is not sober thinking? Now, if you were
Mhm.
to, now if you were to fake an ailment to go see a doctor to get some painkillers or something that doesn't exist, and then you abuse them, that is addiction.
Mhm.
That is not sobriety, clearly. But if you're taking a substance that's going to save your life, that to me is a sober thought. And I talk about the difference to me between sobriety and abstinence or being clean.
Mm-hmm.
Technically, the medical definition is there is none. But to me, I've separated being sober as a mental state and being clean as a physical state, because we've heard it many times. He's a dry drunk. So he's removed the substance, but he's not working a program. So he's clean, right? Because he's removed the substance, but he's not sober because he's still that white knuckling guy who's thinking about
Mm-hmm.
drinking every single day. So he's not sober. He's thinking about getting high and drunk every single day. So if you can be clean but not sober, then you can be sober and not clean. And that's why, and that's, to me, that's medical assisted treatment. You're sober, but you're not clean. By definition, you're not clean. But to me, medical assisted treatment is sobriety, or at least it is a step into sobriety.
Right.
Now, if you're in one of those situations where being on a substance is saving your life, then
Mm-hmm.
removing that substance would not be a sober thought, because now you're
Right.
jeopardizing your life, and ultimately that's the goal, is to be alive.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're not happy with the results or the way that it makes you feel or the way that, whatever it may be, I would suggest looking into alternative medicines. You can also ask your doctor if there's any kind of alternative medicines. Be communicative with your doctor, like, hey, this is how it makes me feel. This is what I like about it. This is what I don't like about it. Um, and find what's right for you. Recovery and sobriety is different for every single person.
Mm-hmm.
It's as unique to
Yeah.
you as your fingerprint. And so, what is going to keep you sober and what is sobriety to you is going to be different from the next person. And so
Mm-hmm.
don't worry too much about what everybody else is thinking. Like, do what is going to make the main character of your story live to the end of the story and live
Yes.
happily ever after. That's the main goal for me.
Bam. I love that. That's such a great way to put it. And you're right. So I was telling you about my job before we started. And so what I'm doing is peer support, peer recovery, like certified
Hmm.
peer recovery specialist.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm learning. I mean, recovery is as individual as our fingerprints. I love the way that you said that, because that's so true. Whatever is working for you. And like Jen says, if your life is manageable and you're having a better life, that it's better than being out of control, putting yourself in danger, or being at risk of dying, like Quinn said. I
Right.
mean, definitely.
Absolutely.
So we are out of time tonight. I'm glad that you joined me. This was a really, really good discussion. So in the comments, you guys, Quinn told his story on my YouTube channel, Hope Shot Recovery. If you guys want to hear more from Quinn, go check it out. You can also find him on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, Patreon. You want to tell him about your Patreon, Quinn?
Sure, absolutely. So I started this Patreon platform where I do sound meditations. I do 2 weekly sound meditations, and it helps you realign your chakras, and it helps you sleep better. It helps you like relieve stress and all these things. That's one of my tiers. I also have another tier that I offer, an online community through Discord, where we have plenty of different text channels, you know from domestic violence to sexual abuse, substance abuse, mutual help. Just like, we have this community that's building of amazing people. I also do 2 weekly sessions on there, where I actually go live with people and talk about whatever it is that they want to talk about, as another tier. And I just unbundled. So I had those as like a group thing, and I just unbundled those so that I could provide the online community and weekly sessions for people who are in recovery, or in, like, who have experienced domestic violence or sexual abuse, to come and join that Discord community for much cheaper. It's like less than half the price that it was now that I've unbundled it. So that I did that to try and make it available, or more easily accessible for people who are looking for it. So that is Patreon /Quinn Stone.
Yep. And also, you could go to the YouTube video, and I linked all of his socials from there. So you can find him from there also.
Heck
Yes.
yeah.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you, Quinn, for coming on tonight. And we will see you guys again later.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure. I appreciate you.
All right. Bye bye.
Bye.